Welcome to the Mojo Podcast with me, Richard Stokes. It's wonderful to have you. Whether you're a regular listener or this is your first time, you are very welcome. The Mojo Podcast is a place for real people to share real stories of change and transformation. And I hope those stories inspire you to take a small or profound step to the change that you've been thinking about. Now, today's episode is like a very early Christmas present. It's so packed full of tips, advice and wise counsel. I feel it's going to be really useful for so many of you. If you lead meetings or gatherings of people, if you facilitate workshops, if you run your own small business, if you're thinking about running a business which allows you to have the lifestyle that you want, then this episode is definitely for you. My guest this week is Kirsty Lewis, founder and owner of the School of Facilitation. Former Diageo employee, skier, and one of the most generous people I've come across on my own Mojo journey. I discovered Kirsty on Instagram, and I love her openness, authenticity, and the way that she's built a business that adheres to her core values, which you'll hear plenty of along the way. She shares her own Mojo story of a brave move out of a successful corporate life to running her own business, and shares so much of what she's learnt along the way. This is a cracker of an episode, and it was a real pleasure to meet Kirsty and have such an open conversation. I hope you enjoy the episode, and as ever, it'd be wonderful if you could share this podcast with friends, leave a 5-star rating, and just the best thing, please write a short review on Apple Podcasts. All of this allows more people to discover the Mojo Podcast. So I'm delighted to be joined by Kirsty Lewis, aka the School of Facilitation, for this episode. Now, I can't quite recall how I began following Kirsty on Instagram, but I think it's around the time I set up my business, and I was really drawn by her expertise and openness in sharing ideas and tools for fellow trainees and facilitators. So I just knew deep down she had a fascinating Mojo story to share. And here we are. We are in, the Mojo podcast has gone up market today. We are in a proper podcasting studio in London's Soho. And I'm joined by Kirsty Lewis.
Hello.
Hello, Kirsty. Wonderful to have you.
Thank you.
And tell me, how is your Mojo today?
My Mojo's good because I've just come from a really cool client meeting. So I'm at a good 8 out of 10. The only reason it's a bit lower is we're both in central London today and it's really grey, cold and drizzly. So blue skies would have pushed it a bit higher. Yeah,
I totally agree. Yesterday I had a walk through Primrose Hill and Regent's Park to come in, and my Mojo was flying at a 9.5 at least. But you're right, a bit grey today.
Very grey.
Environment's important, isn't it? In terms of Mojo and this word, and I'm talking to all my guests right at the beginning of the interview about what Mojo means to you. What would you say it means to you?
For me, it's energy. It's like my joie de vivre. It's like that life force, and it's really it's untouchable, it's palpable, it has an omnipresence, yet often you can't touch it.
So it's a tangible thing, it's a non-tangible thing, it's there, it's around you, you're just aware of it.
I think you are, and I think some people are more aware of it than others. I think it's how conscious are we of the cues our bodies are giving us or our energy systems are giving us. So I think, sometimes some of us live in, if you're on a spectrum, some of us are probably in touch with our Mojos without even knowing it and being really conscious of it. And then other times we're in that space of, we're just so in our heads, we're so cut off from our bodies and our hearts and our souls that you don't even recognise what's going on. And it takes maybe a big event or something to shock you back into recognising your energy levels.
Wow. And how has that changed for you? I mean, we're going to talk about your career and how you've got to running the School of Facilitation, everything you do with that. But so have you noticed a change in how you understand your Mojo?
Oh, yeah, definitely. From it's like before School of Facilitation, which is corporate world, and then the journey I've gone through being an associate and then creating SOF because of all the inner work that you're forever doing and the personal development. So, yes, I'd say definitely way more aware of it now.
And when you were, tell me, let's step back a little bit. Tell me a little bit about your journey to School of Facilitation, because you have had a long and illustrious corporate career.
I don't know about that. But
tell us a little bit about that and maybe where Mojo was along that journey.
I am a classic child of the 70s, so had parents who told me I had to get my GCSE, get my A-levels, go and do a degree, get a job, and that might resonate for many listeners in the UK who are in their 40s. Like, our parents just wanted what they thought was best for us, and it never occurred to me it'd be anything but a graduate job, which I got. I worked in the drinks industry for 12 years. Super lucky in number one drinks company. You guys are recognised brands like Guinness and Smirnoff and Baileys and Pimm's. And we had a fantastic time. And I worked my socks off in high-performing teams, not knowing that I was a high performer myself, because you were like a small fish in a big pond, and everyone was really good at what they did.
Okay.
And expectations were that you worked hard, you played hard, you were rewarded for that. It didn't occur to me that sometimes I was working too much or I was flying all over the world too much. It was just the norm, and that was a given. But it was brilliant. I had so much experience, and I was Diageo is an amazing company for learning, and they really put people at the heart of their business in some instances. So we were all coached a lot and had lots of learning and development. And that was the team I was part of in sales capability when I was leaving Diageo. At the same time, though, I managed to persuade the company to put me through my NLP practitioner and then masters. And it was at that point where I thought I was just going to learn some tools and skills and what NLP was. It's suddenly I'm like, oh, I'm doing work on myself. And that's when things started to shift, and suddenly, what are my values? What are my beliefs that I'm holding to be true? What is it I really, really want? And then one day, I can date it, it's the 7th of April, 2007, a friend of mine was testing a workshop at Queen's Club all about creating great outcomes. And he said, would you come and test it for us? Or be part of the group? And I didn't have an outcome that I wanted to work on. And so I just facetiously wrote down, it's April 2009, and I am an NLP coach and trainer, and I earn £5,000 a month. And I thought that was audacious, because I think my take-home salary at that time was like 3.5K. And I was like, yeah, that doesn't exist. And this was like pre-social media. It was pre that higher awareness that all of us have now. So I wrote that down. And as I cycled away that evening, I was like, that's what I want to do. Actually, I do want to become a trainer and a coach. I had no idea how to do that, but that's where that whole journey then started. So that was like April 2007.
Wow. So with all that wonderful, the immense benefits that we get from corporate working, right? All that fantastic investment in training and development, especially at a company like Diageo, as you mentioned, the outcome of that is this: I now understand my values, who I am, what I want a lot more, and you manifested this future.
I guess I did. And so what was a real telling moment for me was I resigned in the early October that year, because I went through highs and lows of do I leave, don't I leave, and tears before bedtime and tantrums. And when I resigned, I remember my boss just being really surprised. He just looked at me and was like, what? Oh, no one he didn't say this, but no one really resigned from Diageo at that time. And there was no such thing as redundancies at that point either. There were a few who had come through, but it wasn't the thing. So it wasn't like I was going to leave on a payoff. And I remember him ringing me about a week later going, Ron wants to talk to you. So he was like my grandfather role. So he was like 2 above me. He wants to sit down and talk to you about what it is you really want, and he wants to make you some offers. And I remember listening to that going, and I didn't say this, but I just felt really clear all the way through my core that, yeah, he can say whatever he wants and I'm not going to want it. And he did. He sat there and said, do you want to go to Singapore? Do you want to go to Dubai? What kind of role do you want? We'll make it happen. And I just went, thank you, but no thank you. And even he was shocked. But because I was really clear on what it is, was important to me at that point. I had no idea how I was going to make things happen, but I just knew what became important.
And where do you think that clarity had come from? Because that's difficult to resist, I think. I mean, I've been in those situations where you know, the hierarchy offers you something on paper. This looks amazing.
Yeah.
But you knew it wasn't right for you.
It sounds so wanky. It's an inner knowing, because I guess without realising it, having gone through all this NLP learning, whilst I was it was a parallel process. So I'm learning, but then I was doing all the work on myself. And that was probably the real first time I'd done a lot of work on self. So I think it's like, you know, scrubbing a potato. There was loads of crap to come off. it was brilliant. So, lots of changes happened quite quickly. And maybe it was always there and it was always ripe for the taking. I mean, originally, as a kid, I always wanted to be a teacher. So I think I get to be the teacher of adults now, not a teacher of children.
Well, I was going to say, so you are fulfilling your childhood ambition, but just in a different way.
Exactly. And I think, don't they, whoever they are, by the way, often say, look back to what you were doing and what made you happy in childhood. And often those are the things that we get drawn to more so in our adult life, but often they've been told, no, you can't do that when you're younger. I know you're amazing at art, pottery, sport, but off music, you get pushed. Or we were.
Well, no, again, being a child of the 70s, I hear exactly what you're saying about those aspirations of your parents become your aspirations, because that's just sensible, isn't it? That's the right thing to do. Go and get a good corporate graduate gig. It comes from the heart, it comes from the right place. But we do forget what made us really happy, as you say, in that childlike state, what makes us really, really happy. Brilliant. Okay, well, that's a lovely way of going through how you got to running your own business. So tell us a little bit more about what you're doing, you have been doing actually for some time with School of Facilitation.
So SOF started 5 years ago. Before that, I was in associate roles. And there were certain points, and we'll talk about it in a moment, where I thought I'd start having my own clients, but it didn't happen. But SOF, she came to be after a 9-month gestation period. It really was 9 months. And SOF is all about creating human-centered learning and events and gatherings through great design and delivery. And we work with corporates, and we also work with other facilitators and trainers. Corporates, because a lot of them are all doing their own in-house training now, which is brilliant and absolutely fantastic. What we discover, though, is often learning and development teams, HR teams, are the last people to get their own development because they're so busy supporting everybody else. And often, again, they've learned how to design and deliver learning or create great events through trial and error or through a little bit of reading or their own just personal passion. The reason I also hang out and connect with other facilitators and trainers is, it's really rewarding to be able to talk to other people who do what you do. Secondly, I think if we are to be in service of our own clients, we need to keep evolving and growing ourselves. And I think one side of our own development is how are we creating, designing, delivering when we work with our clients. And it's really easy to forget that side. Sometimes we get into more about our topics, leadership, finance, sales, marketing, or we go on a big route of personal development. But I think there's something around how are you designing and delivering what you're doing and creating networks and communities, because we all know it can be quite lonely out there.
Well, and that I can very much relate to. I'm a year into running my own thing and looking for, when you've been in an office environment, which I used to get a lot of energy from, I used to get quite drained by with the not so good things of offices. But not being around people as sounding boards, informal mentors, that sort of thing, you find you have to go and build your own, which is, I think, how I discovered you.
Cool.
And as I said at the top, I mean, the way you're very generous with sharing, and it's not lip service. It is very tangible tools and techniques, right? And you're gifting these, and I find that very refreshing. Maybe because I've spent my whole life in corporates where corporates don't gift to what could be competitors. And I don't think you necessarily see your network as competitors, right?
I don't. I know some people do, and I think that happens in all networks, that there are definitely some, and I've had this experience where people think I'm competing with them, and I'm just like, that's ridiculous. I have, one of my values is abundance, and another one is generosity. I just have an abundance mentality. There is enough for all, and there's enough to go around. So me sharing with you a questioning technique or how to position certain situations at the top of a workshop or how to design a workshop and giving that in a conversation or as an ebook, that's fine. I mean, you're not going to go and suddenly run off with my ideas, I think, and recreate them. And if you did, so what? Good luck to you. It doesn't bother me, but I know there's other people out there. We've just had a conversation about IP with a client just before I came, and they were being told by an agency that they couldn't share some impact and influencing content they'd created for this client with anybody else because it's their IP. And I just makes my heart sink that there's people out there who think that their impact and influencing content is that amazing or cannot be found anyway online. Google is an amazing resource in this day and age, and we all know ultimately it's down to our delivery and what we do with it. And I don't think you can IP stuff like impact and influence personally, because it's questioning and listening and building rapport. How can you IP that? Anyway, I can rant about that. That's
completely agree. I think that taking that abundance mindset to what you do just puts you in a much more relaxed, open frame of mind. And if you come into something with a stressed frame of mind, the work you're going to be doing, it's not going to be at the level you want it to be. In what we do when we're working with people, we're listening with people, I just find you have to be very open. And that word abundance, I love that word. And I also love when we did a little chat before this on Skype, and you actually showed me on your wall in your office, there are your values written up.
Yeah.
How wonderful.
Thank you. Another thing I've realised as well about the abundance, I think what goes around comes around. So I genuinely think people will say I give stuff away or I have conversations. Nothing might come of it at that point in time. Yeah, I know further down, and this is starting to pay off now, it comes back, not to bite my bum, but actually in a real positive sense of people going, can we work with you? Do you know someone who could help us here? And it's like, that's why I do it. And it's not because I'm thinking, I'm going to rake in the millions, because none of us would be trainers or facilitators if we thought we were going to rake in the millions. We do it because we care and we want to make a difference to people's lives.
So the thought that comes to mind for me is around, and you mention it in terms of the abundance, and that there's this trust that you're putting things out there and they will eventually come back. But here's the question. Yes. As a, you run your own business, you've got things like cash flow and other associates to pay and tax to worry about, and VAT and all that wonderful stuff. How does that, and this, I'll come back to Mojo, how do you balance off that things will take time, I have to trust, with where your Mojo is?
Ooh. So I am not stupid enough to think I can just sit and hope and wait that things are going to show up. I've been gifted brilliant corporate clients in the past and now, and often work on big projects, and I just recognise what that cash flow is going to be so that I can then distribute it evenly and make sure that it is spent wisely and I know how much I have to pay in my tax. I know how much I have to pay in my associates. So you save that money. You do not spend what you do not have. And if anyone does, they're foolish. But that's another conversation. And it's then balancing not saying yes to everything, because you might, and all of us will have this temptation at certain points. You'll be offered, people will say, can you do this piece of work? And you know it's not your sweet spot, but then you still do it. And then you're like, God, that was so boring, or this is really hard. So sometimes saying no, and then the trusting is that there will be potential gaps and silence in your days and your weeks. To begin with, that scared the bejesus out of me. And now I'm like, oh, thank Christ for that. I've got some time off, or not even time off. It's just time to do some reading, time to do some mental preparation, time to do some thinking. Because something always comes. But if we keep ourselves busy doing things, even for clients we don't really want to have, you don't create any space for something else to show up. And I don't know what the magic formula is, but it is just trusting that if you give yourself space again in your week, your month, things do show up. But if you it's back to your mentality thing. If you think that nothing's going to show up, it won't. But I don't know what it is. And I've sometimes wondered, how does it happen? How do people suddenly show up in my space and my clients? And I'm super lucky at the moment. And I don't know where they come from. And I'm not your classic, I have my list of clients. I don't go knocking on doors. I've never spoken to anyone in my network and said, can you introduce me to people? And that makes me sound, I don't know if that sounds ridiculous or just stupid or naive, but I think people just show. But I guess maybe it's a trust. Maybe I need to think more. Someone needs to interview me again and we work it out. The other thing I did do, which helped for a while, I was an associate. And I think making that transition from corporate and being an associate, as well as having some of your own clients, helps you fall into the rhythm of this new world, this new pattern of working and this new way of being, because it is different. Like you're only responsible to yourself and your clients. You could stay in bed all day if you wanted to, but you also know nothing could get done at that point. So I think associate work can help us. You're not having to go and find the work yourself. You can get to know an agency or get to know a company, see how they run their projects, how they do things. You might get to meet some cool clients. You just see a different way of working, and that's super helpful to do that, I think. But there does come a time you then start to go, maybe I'd like to do something different.
No, that makes a lot of sense and resonates with me, because I'm in year 1, 2 of this, and I've got some really good associateships that help me with exactly that. There's a bit of certainty about some work. There is connection with a wider team, which is wonderful. And, we're all honing our crafts all the time. And I loved what you talked about. And you said, when my day isn't full, I use that time to do the reading, to energize myself, because that is exactly what your client, I imagine, wants you to have when you walk into the room.
And actually, I think our clients don't want a stressed out, time poor trainer or facilitator rushing in. So if you have got space and time, go out for a walk. Like yesterday, I went for a swim in the afternoon. I felt slightly guilty that I was swimming in the afternoon, but actually I felt really good for it. And therefore... like sport to me is one of my, I don't know what you call it, like one of the ingredients to a great week. And if I don't have that, I become this very irritable individual. And I think all of that now, it's not just your work life where you're in an office and then home life. I think it's blended, it's everything. And when you're facilitating, training, coaching, all of that comes into play. What you eat, how you sleep, how you move, whether you are doing a spiritual practice, whether that's even just a simple meditation, then what you're doing from a work perspective, does that bring you joy? Does it make you happy? Are you traveling loads, driving, flying, trains? It all becomes part of the same deal now. It's not like, oh, I was at work today and did this and then I'm home doing that. It feels, for me, it's a blend. And it's how you choose your time.
Tell me about that guilt word you used. Because... this is, as you said, this is your business. This is your time. You could stay in bed if you want. And I know you're very, I met you, I've got inverted commas, via Instagram, and you're really open and transparent with what's going on in your life on Instagram. Tell me a little bit about that.
So I think the guilt probably is hereditary from corporate world, because if any of us, I remember when I first started working from home when I was in sales, at Diageo, and I said to one of my friends, another Kirsty, my diary's not very busy yet with clients. And she was like, honestly, Kirsty, do not worry about it. Put the washing on, go for a walk. Gyms were just coming popular at that time, 2002. Go to the gym, because I promise you, time will suddenly get really busy. I wonder whether the guilt I perceive I have is just left over. Because actually, if I'm really honest, and you know my life, I don't feel that guilty, because I create spaces where I can go for a walk. I mix my time with living in France, with living in the UK, with travelling for my clients. There's a photograph on my Instagram page which a friend took just before I did a connecting call with one of the luxury brands. And I've got smart upper half makeup, even brushed my hair after the photo. And then I got my ski gear on underneath.
I saw that picture. It's wonderful.
But that's how I am. And actually, a lot of my clients are on Instagram with me, and they see that and they know that. And I tell them that, because I'm like, I'm not going to tell you I'm sat in an office when I'm not, because I just think, what's the point? Though I do sometimes feel like I have to justify myself. So maybe that's still the guilt coming through, because I feel I have to justify my chosen way of living. But actually, a lot of my friends are very good at calling me out, saying, but you created all of that. Like, you manifested it, whatever you want to say. And it's not that you're lucky, you just made it happen. But I do work as well when I'm in France, in Maribel, or in Paris. It's not all just croissants and coffee. So.
And I guess you're working to your rhythm, to what works for you, and you
Correct.
know yourself mentally, physically, what works for you. Now, we talked a little bit about Mojo in the past, but it sounds like the business is going fantastically. Clients are coming to you, which is a great position to be in. However, this is the Mojo podcast, and I'm guessing there may have been times when you were running your own business that things, maybe your mojo was a bit lower.
Yes.
Did that happen? Has that happened?
So There's 2 times where I'm conscious of like a massive dip in mojo. And when you and I spoke, you were like, do you think it might have happened before? So if I describe, and I said I didn't know, but I think it probably did. So if I describe the 2 scenarios, periods of time, because it was periods of time. So the first time was 2014, and it was around September time that it must have come really obvious, because I was talking to my mentor and she was like, she called me out and she said something's not right. Now, admittedly, my mum had died in 2011, so I think grief does interesting things to all of us. At that time, I didn't have SOF as a business, though it was always this sort of perception that we as trainers and facilitators needed to keep our personal growth going. And she said, I'm going to gift you a coaching session with this amazing coach in America. And it was all around systemic constellations and systemic family work. And I started working with Judy for the next 9 months, who she was my coach in the States. And I remember talking to her going, I'm in like a fug, F-U-G. So I felt like I was wading through fog, mud, like everything energetically felt slow, turgid. And I was starting to not enjoy the associate work I was doing. I was getting... I call it plug and play, so I was even using quite derogative language towards it. These guys were brilliant. I really loved working for them, but I was a bit like, my energy's not there. Clearly, kept telling everyone I was fine about mum dying. Who's ever fine when a parent dies and when they go too soon? So that was time number 1. And what happened in that period, so it was September 2014, and then I dived into another big piece of personal transformation work using something called systemic constellations, which I remember doing all of 2015, 2016. And that was like, oh, this is interesting. And it was real shifting again of beliefs and values from a family perspective, which we all know our family stuff always shows up in our work stuff. But that's also parallel with the start of birthing or gestation of School of Facilitation in the first 9 months. But what was really interesting is just the energetic like heaviness of it all. And it took ages. So if we talk about September 2014 all the way through for another year to like August 2015, I was in a massive state of change, and transformation is the word you and I've used. What I didn't realise at the time was like how long it bloody takes. And I think that's something to know, is sometimes you might start to recognise external cues or internal cues of how you're feeling, thinking, I don't know, you can't sleep, or you're feeling like you haven't got any energy, or everything feels really hard. But it just takes time to then work through what it is. And I don't think I'd have been able to have done that if I hadn't had coaches. So that was just a time that helped. And then the next time I noticed something similar happening was last year in 2019. Okay. And I think I was thinking about this before we spoke. I think it started back at the summer before in August 2018. Is that right? Yes. And there was a family holiday that was all being built up as a big thing. So it was my dad's 70th. But on the first day of the holiday, my partner wrote my car off. Okay. So that was quite traumatic. Yeah. I'd got the wrong insurance. So that cost me a lot of money, 5 figures, to replace or just to have to scrap it.
Ouch.
Massive family trauma arguments. Half my family aren't speaking to each other now. And I was like, this was meant to be a holiday, 3-week break where I had in my head, I'll take some time out, I'll do some reading and some writing, we're hanging out in France, it'll all be cool. Absolute shit show. And I think it started then, because by the time I got to Christmas time and I was in Mirabel again, I was a bit like no energy. Why can't I manifest anything? Nothing's really working. I'm feeling really lethargic and irritated, and I'm not doing the work I probably want to be doing. Yet I know what it is I want to do, but I can't seem to bring it to life. I can sort of bring it out. So yeah, that happened so like January, February, March, most of last year, I just wallowed in self-pity and I'm still doing all work. You'd probably never know unless you knew me really well to call me out. And then I started working with another really great embodiment coach in March, April time last year, and started just talking to more people about what I was looking to achieve or what I thought would be really great for SOF, and asking other people's opinions. And then the other thing, all the way through that, though, I remained consistent on things like the newsletter. Even though sometimes I didn't think I wanted to put out a newsletter, I would do it twice a month. I would host the gatherings, even if only 3 people were showing up.
Yeah.
I would always do the online gatherings. And I don't know, there's something there about rhythm and having consistency, even at times when you're like, oh, what's the point?
So you really didn't feel like doing it, but you just knew deep down, it's better if I do this.
Yes.
I get out and do this. And what, those are 2, and thank you for sharing that, by the way. There's 2 very distinct and particular moments of low ebb mojo, whatever you want to call it. Did you think by the second time, were you recognising the signals?
I think I've recognised the signals because of our conversations. Isn't hindsight a wonderful thing?
Yeah.
And by the time I was sort of in the coaching conversations and talking it through last, say, spring, early summer, I knew that there was transition. I started to label it as that, going, maybe there's some cool stuff about to come around the corner. Maybe something's just about to start shifting. And then August time, like getting emails or requests from some very cool clients going, oh, could we have a conversation with you? And I'm like, where have you come from? Like, I didn't say that to them, but I was like, yeah, absolutely. And things started to just like pick up again, and the momentum started to build again. So, yeah.
How attached is your personal mojo to School of Facilitation and the business?
Yeah, it's all in one thing at the moment. Yeah. Because when you are the leader of your own business, and it is that as small as we are at SOF currently, this is one of the things that a very, very good friend called out to me. He said, because you're the plug, and he drew a stick man, and then he drew 2 clouds, and he said, like, you're the plug in the funnel, like things only happen because of you, and if you want to make a shift with SOF, it's how can other people get involved, so it's not always about you, which is a really good point. Right. So I think at this point in time, to answer your question, Mojo plus Kirsty plus SOF are all intertwined. Yeah,
which just makes you understand that you need to put a lot of focus on it and recognise when things are shifting and changing, perhaps. A question for you, because you do work now for your own business, but you work with lots of corporate entities, and you talked about those learning development HR folk that need the support. What's your observation of what's going on in big business around businesses' mojo and people's mojo? I appreciate that's a big question, but I'm just really intrigued because you're in a fabulous position to see people when they're very open and vulnerable almost.
My perception is pure perception. Within businesses, I think I come across groups of people who are super passionate about what they do, what they want to do in terms of learning and development and helping others. And then they get frustrated because they come up against the system, the hierarchy. The computer says, no, you can't do this. And therefore they look like a bit deflated. And so when we have conversations with them about working with groups and delivering learning, we often can pick into their challenges, and you just see them go, yeah, how did you know that? So being able to give them just an injection of energy in those periods is really great. Company mojos overall, I think it's just a fascinating time, because I think everything's going to pot and we're all in chaos. So I think, there's a very big statement, but I think a lot of companies are probably having to start to tackle their own what's going on sustainably, what's our perception of climate change, how are we showing up from a recycling perspective, how are our people, because actually, gosh, loads of them could choose to leave now if they want to and set up on their own. So I think a lot of the classic corporates are potentially being quite challenged at all angles. And I can only imagine that could be quite energetically draining for some.
Yeah, and really fleet of foot competitors coming in and stealing their lunch, and all that's happening. Yep. So, I totally see that myself with my relatively recent experience of being in, working with big clients, and now my own clients with Mojo. But thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. And looking at how you work and how you talked a lot about design and delivery of workshops. Mm-hmm. What do you bring into that to make sure people are getting the most from it, that they're mojos, and you've talked about what's going on in corporates,
Yeah.
but what you're bringing into that to really lift people's energy levels and just make them get the most out of it.
So for me, there is, anyone knowing me who's listening to this will laugh. There's no such thing as an energizer or an icebreaker, because both of those words suggest to me you've just designed your session really poorly. And if you've got to give someone an icebreaker or an energizer, often that means they've been sat down for too long, or you haven't done some very good introductions at the beginning or connecting exercises in the first hour. So for me, it always starts with, why are we coming together today, and what outcomes are there for the learners, for the business, and even for SOF, because I think those are the three groups at play in the system. So you've got to be really clear on your purpose and outcomes first, because then how you design the space, what rooms you ask to use, the exercises you bring in, all of those create mojo and energy in that event, whether it's a 1 hour meeting all the way through to like a 3-day session. So for me, that you've got to start with purpose and outcomes. And if any of you have read The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker, she's like, purpose is everything. It's your bouncer for your guest list. It is the definitive for the kind of environment you're going to use. It will guide you on who's included, who's excluded. It's a really good book, and I totally recommend it as a resource for people.
And I love that when you say, I guess when we're thinking about workshops, we often think, it's a half day or a day at least, lots of time. But actually what you're talking about is an hour of gathering, a meeting, and how much time we all spend in meetings which don't have clear purpose.
And then people get frustrated, and you can see them switching off, like, why am I here? What's the point? And we've all been there. We've all been in those spaces. So even now when I go onto phone calls, and even though the client's driving it, I will often backtrack them and go, what do you want from this conversation today? Or what will success look like? What do you want to go away thinking or feeling? Because I need that now as my check-in. Otherwise, I'm like, where's this conversation going to go?
Right.
And it's like free for all.
Yeah. And
I just think back now to some of those meetings we were having in the corporate world where that didn't exist. And you're like, God, how did we get anything done?
I mean, I've got a view that nobody... I mean, there are stats around this, the amount of hours, the amount of money that's spent on meetings. Very few people are trained to lead or facilitate internally a good meeting. I mean, I certainly wasn't. I've actually done a lot of reading around the subject now, and I'm really interested in it. But it's such a big investment of time. You look around a table. I used to sit on a global team in my last agency, and you think about the cost of that gathering. Yep. And yes, of course, we discussed some good and some meaty subjects, but did we spend the time at the beginning, exactly as you said, what's our purpose, what are we looking for, and what will success look like today? Never, sadly.
I mean, here's a present for everyone. So Diageo, one of their best gifts, and I recycle it all the time, at every meeting, under the guise of Porsche, we were told you couldn't call a meeting unless you had a POST. And so POST stands for purpose, outcome, structure, and time. So any meeting invite that went out, you had to be really clear, what is the POST of this? At the start of the meeting, you would name it and talk it through. Now, it became a little bit, it is a tool. It depends how it's then facilitated and actually used. What it does, though, is drive your thinking and why are we here? What will we achieve by the end of the conversation? How are we going to do it? And how much time do we actually have? And I just really encourage people to start writing down a POST, even if you're going on a phone call, even if you're having a half-hour conversation with someone, like, why am I doing this? What do I want to achieve? Because you're setting intention, and it is super useful. I coach salespeople to use it. We do it internally with workshops and gatherings. It's one of the best 4-letter acronyms I was ever given. A POST.
I love that. And there you go, everybody. That is the generosity of Kirsty in the School of Facilitation right there. There's the gift. Yeah. I mean, everybody can use that in their as you say, the next phone call, the next meeting, POST. I will put that in the show notes so everybody has got that, and that's a wonderful gift. Kirsty, sort of slightly, I'm very conscious of your time today, but in terms of where you're going with the School of Facilitation and how people can get involved in it.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that.
So how you guys can get involved, if you are a facilitator and trainer, come join the gang. So I'll have the language of the gang. Because as both Rich and I have said, if you are working on your own, it can feel quite lonely, disconnected. So monthly we have online gatherings, which are the second Monday of every month, 10 a.m. GMT.
There's the rhythm.
So there's a rhythm.
There's a rhythm.
So everyone's welcome to come to those. We either have guest speakers or we do what I call the open circle. So you could bring a challenge you've got or something that you're working on and you want some input. They're free, so come along. Sign up for the newsletter. There's always, I'd like to think, a pearl of wisdom at least once a month that I put out and share.
I guarantee it. I've experienced it.
There are, if you're in the UK, we have face-to-face gatherings once a quarter, and they're in, bizarrely, London, Leamington Spa and Winchester. The reason for that is I lived in London. I now live near Winchester, and I thought Leamington Spa was sort of central-ish UK.
Is it the town that's the most central in the UK or something like that?
It's Meridian,
it's one of those.
but
yeah, okay.
And I've got good friends who live there, so I was like, right, we're having a session there.
That's a good reason.
And we're looking to do more sessions, gatherings, in the UK, and then ultimately take them global as well, because we want to bring them.
Ibiza's nice.
I'd be up for. We should do
let's
one.
Let's do that.
Okay,
let's do it.
We'll do one in Ibiza.
Right.
I'm there. Brilliant.
Right. It's an incredible place. There's amazing energy that I think everyone would really benefit from. So let's
start talking that one through.
Yeah,
definitely. So there are plans to expand the space for ourselves as facilitation trainers. We also do classes, because giving back on one-day classes, so on how to design great events, how to deliver. I have this thing that a lot of us do workshops and we deliver, but when was the last time anyone ever coached you on your delivery, on your language, on your body language, on your room setup? It rarely happens, so we run a delivery class. And then I work with a fabulous graphic facilitator, and we do a graphics class because I'm quite passionate about good flip charts.
Posters.
I love a poster. Yes. I love a border. So we run those classes, and currently they're UK, but we're looking to move those around the world as well.
Wow.
But come get involved. Come and find us. We're on LinkedIn, Instagram, School of Facilitation. But that's the main thing for the collective. And then if it's corporates, always open to conversations and doing lots of more trainer learning journeys and upskilling and working within businesses. At all different levels.
Great. And I'll put all those links that you've mentioned, they'll all be in the show notes, and make it super easy to find you. And I mean, as a minimum, the Instagram, you should absolutely follow School of Facilitation, because there's gifts, there's how open you are with everything that's going on, and I just love that.
Thank you.
And just to close up, and I try and save this question for the end. Sometimes we cover it as we've been going, but if you think about your daily routine, and you've talked to this a little bit, but what are maybe the three things that you know you have to do every day to keep your mojo as high as it can be?
There's always some form of movement. So first thing in the morning or midday. So there's like yoga, swimming, running, cycling. 3 coffees first thing in the morning, but never after 11. Then I have like mint tea. The other thing as well is enriching conversations, like talking to people. Because if I have days where I don't talk to anyone, I'm just in design mode or admin and running the business, I start to sort of rock and dribble. So I do need to have enriching conversations with other people.
And that last, I mean, no one's mentioned that sort of thing before, by the way. That's really interesting. How do you make those happen? Because I put them in. You put them in. You
have
know,
to.
I have to, again, rhythm.
And so I've got a couple of really great buddies who we often do lots of project work together anyway, and I know I can pick up the phone and talk to them. It's having your own cheerleading squad that are there for you.
Yes.
So there's a group of us called the SOF Collective, and they're doing a lot of thinking with me on where to go next. They are part of that cheerleading squad, so as well as Sean and Sarah, who I talk to lots.
Everybody needs a cheerleading squad.
Absolutely. And if you're thinking about transitioning from corporate, you need a cheerleading squad.
Yes. I have my own, and I look to add to it
Yeah.
with the right sort of people, the right sort of energy. Wow. Kirsty Lewis, thank you so much. I've sat here and I've learnt a ton about you, about P.O.S.T, about loads of other things that we're going to share, and I know everyone's going to get a huge amount from. So thank you so much for your time and joining me in this lovely little studio in London, Soho.
Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed myself.
I told you this episode was full of gifts. What a wonderful, wonderful episode, and thank you so much to Kirsty for her time. And where do I even start on takeaways with this one? There are just so many. I love Kirsty's abundance mindset. By being so generous, this positive energy always comes back to her. And I totally relate to the idea of this hangover guilt, a feeling that comes from the way that we used to work in corporate life, but that's not the case now as we run our own businesses. And also that low mojo can be a sign of transition, that something big is about to happen. So if you're feeling that, don't fear it. Understand it. Go there. What's going on for you? What's happening? Explore it a little bit more. And this idea of the enriching conversations that she has on a daily basis. Yes, of course, these might happen by chance, but when we're self-employed, what a great idea to plan these in and make sure you're having those really nourishing conversations on a daily basis. And in terms of the Mojo Challenge, well, I've actually got 2 for you this week. I would love it if you went out and used P.O.S.T as a way to set up and run a really effective meeting or even a phone call. And think about your own cheerleading squad. Who's in it? Who would you like to be in it? How can you manage that a little bit better? We definitely all need cheerleaders. So thanks again to Kirsty. And if you'd like to find out more about the School of Facilitation, find them certainly on Instagram, and I've posted other links in the show notes. So we have more fabulous guests coming up, and as I said before, if you have a topic you'd like covered or know somebody with an inspiring Mojo story, please do get in touch. And it's been wonderful receiving emails from people on that exact subject so far. I'm immensely grateful for every single listen the podcast gets. Thanks for taking the time, and I hope it's valuable for you. If it is, please do that super generous thing. Leave a 5-star rating and a short review. And yes, you can leave those reviews more than once apparently. And thank you so much. Okay, until next week, I hope your mojo continues to flow.